Gone in 60 Seconds is a film that came out in the year 2000s, and I had never seen it until now. Probably for the same reason it took me a while to actually get started watching the Fast and Furious series, because it's about a car. It's an action film about a car. That being said, over the years, obviously, I've gotten to be a little bit of a fan of the Fast and Furious series, and I figured now was as good of a time as any to get started watching this movie. Ultimately, it stars Nicolas Cage as essentially a master thief whenever it comes down to Grand Theft Auto. He's really good at boosting cars, but the thing is, he's retired. But the bad guys, you see, the bad guys want him to be unretired, come back into the business because they got his brother. They're gonna kill him if he doesn't. His job is pretty simple. All he has to do is steal 50 cars in one night, otherwise his brother dies. And hot on his trail is a cop that has a personal vendetta against his character. Now, coming out in the year 2000, you know what you're gonna get. Corn City, the late 90s, early 2000s, that are all kind of the same in terms of what you get as a cinematic experience. You get a lot of techno music, you get a lot of futuristic looking fonts that zoom in and then zoom back out. And obviously you do get some corny acting, but at the same time it is a Nicolas Cage film. So in that respect, corny acting kind of just goes hand in hand with him 9 times out of 10, and this was his period where he was kind of top dog in terms of films. Like, he was in a lot of stuff during this decade, roughly. So that was actually my main reason for wanting to watch the movie, was because of Nick Cage, and I really liked the movies that he came out with during this period in his life. The film is also filled to the brim with a lot of recognizable names, as it definitely seems to be an ensemble film of its own regard. It is a remake of a film that came out, I think, in the 70s, which I don't know anything about that. I have not seen that. But this had an ensemble cast, most of which you probably will recognize. However, I don't think the casting was utilized very well. The movie clearly wanted to focus more on Nick Cage than anybody else. I feel like the film thinks that it's smart in terms of introducing all these characters and how different they are, but it's not. This is one of those ensemble films where you're watching for the cast more so than you're watching for their respective characters. Believe it or not, the Fast and Furious series, even though that is an ensemble cast with a bunch of people that you recognize, I actually do watch that series specifically for the characters, not for the cast. This, however, is all about the cast, and that's the only thing you will take out of the film after you watch it. You'll think back fondly of the film if you loved it, but you won't remember the characters as much as you remember who played in the movie. I mean, heck, the love interest for Nick Cage, Angelina Jolie, but she's barely utilized in the film. She's almost an afterthought if you really pay attention to the film. She's kind of barely in it. She's there from beginning to end, but she's barely in it as far as importance goes, I should say. And the same goes for, I would say, a majority of the cast, but it's most recognizable with Angelina Jolie because she's on the cover of the poster and you expect her to be there, providing some kind of sustenance to the plot, in which she's not, other than to be kind of an extension to Nick Cage's character. When it comes down to the narrative and the pace of the film, I would say that the first half of the movie is clearly not as good as the second half. The first half is more or less introducing you to all of these characters and what makes them tick. However, I was not invested in that pretty much whatsoever. Those characters are fun, but again, I feel like the film thinks it's more clever than it really is when it comes down to those characters and the character development there, because I don't think there really is any. It just wanted to make sure that you understood where all these people came from instead of throwing them all out at you all at once. That would make a lot less sense. So in that regards, I understand it, but I do think the first half should have been shorter. Like, I feel like they could tell the same story and introduce the same characters with a lot less time. Like, say, a half-hour time cut from the film. It's like a 2-hour film. It could have easily been an hour and a half. The second half of the film, which is where the actual plot of the film comes into play, is much better. There's a lot more action. There's a lot more stuff that you can actually follow as an audience member and get sucked into more. But do me a favor and don't question it too much, because if you question it, you'll start to think, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yes, he has to steal 50 cars and get to this one spot or else his brother will die. All great, but I'm a little bit lost on why the bad guys want 50 cars, and specifically those 50 cars. It's not answered. Also, going back to the casting, I always look for people that feel born to play their roles. And even though Nick Cage obviously has the central focus of the film, I don't really believe he fits this character as much as anybody else would. He's just Nick Cage. However, there is one character in this entire film that I feel like was casted perfectly, and this was the cop that was after Nick Cage's character. Now, this guy obviously has a vendetta against him. It feels personal, it feels real, it feels relatable. And this guy, I forget his name, but I've seen him in a million different things. He plays his heart out in this character. He feels like he is the character, and that's why I like his casting. Everybody else could have been played by anybody else, in my opinion. Anybody. The action is okay. It's not exactly Fast and Furious, but it has a little bit, a twinge of the feeling that you get from Fast and Furious, especially towards the end of the film when there's this big ramp and jump moment. If you've seen the movie, you know what it is. That kind of feels like the Fast and the Furious. But all in all, did I regret never watching until now? Not exactly. I am glad that I watched it. I was never really incredibly bored with it, but I did kind of expect a little bit more out of it. I mean, this is a Jerry Bruckheimer film with Nick Cage, which is the same exact thing as National Treasure, which I absolutely love. So I was hoping that my interest in it would be roughly the same type of deal. Overall, when it comes out of the rating, I will be rating Gone in 60 Seconds a B-. It's an entertaining watch. You can kill time while watching it, put it on the background while you're doing your chores. It doesn't require a keen attention or anything like that where you'll miss everything if you look away. But at the same time, it is an early 2000s action film, and we've all seen enough of those to know exactly what you're getting into. But yeah, guys, have you seen Gone in 60 Seconds? Either this one or the original film back in the 70s? And if you have, is it really a remake, or did they take creative liberties and do their own thing? Let me know. And as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit the like, subscribe button, and bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace out.
Rev up the engine, it's time to ride. Gonna chase the thrill with nothing to hide.